So let's talk a little bit about the importance of the nutrition label. So if you're buying things in a package of any sort, so a box, a plastic container, a can, anything like that, you're going to have a label on it that's going to contain two very important pieces of information. One is the nutrition facts, we'll show that in just a second, and then one is the actual ingredients. So obviously you want to know what's in your food. If you're not buying fresh produce or maybe your meat, you're not getting out of that section where it comes from that section of the store, your fruits and vegetables are not going to have nutrition labels on them. So let's, for example, look at tofu. We have here the tofu section. Tofu sometimes is considered a bit of a controversial food to eat. I would suggest to you one of the things about tofu that maybe make it controversial is the fact that it's typically genetically modified. Now here I'm holding organic tofu, you'll see. It's clearly labeled as organic on the top of this package. So therefore you have the comfort and the security to know that this is not a genetically modified organism source. So again, let's go back to our nutrition label for just one moment. You'll see the nutrition facts up here at the top, and it's broken down by the fat content, cholesterol, although we talked about this in another objective where cholesterol is no longer considered a primary source of nutrition in terms of a recommendation perspective from the USDA's guidelines. And then we have sodium, that's always considered to be very important. You'll usually have different types of things like potassium, and then you have total carbohydrate. You always have fiber, and then you have the amount of protein. And then underneath that, you have different types of vitamins and minerals as well. You get those breakdowns, particularly for some of the main ones like vitamin C and of course calcium. Now depending on what may or may not be in this food, in this case tofu is a good example of something that does contain quite a bit of calcium in it. So for example, calcium we typically think of as only coming from dairy food, but we get calcium from tofu as well. And then the other part of the nutrition label that's very important is the actual ingredients. And I mentioned that initially when we first started talking about this objective. This gives you the very specific information that what is contained within this particular product. The other thing that I want to point out to you that's also very important about the nutrition label is to look at your servings per container. So sometimes people get confused in terms of how much nutrition is in this label or how much nutrition is in this package. And so they typically look at these amounts, particularly for the macronutrients, the fat, the carbohydrate, and the protein, but then they fail to neglect to look at the serving size and then the servings per container. So you can see here that for this particular package of tofu, the serving size is only 1/5 of the package, and there are 5 servings per container in this package. So that means that you have to adjust these amounts accordingly depending on how much of the package you eat at one meal or at one serving. And then on the other side of the label, you have some of these standard breakdowns of different nutrients here based on the daily recommendation or the daily value for these. So again, it's very, very important. Anytime you're buying something that comes in a package, you want to make sure, if you're not already familiar with the food, to look at that nutrition label. Very important thing to do. Okay, a couple of really important things to think about when you're looking at your food labels are two things: trans fat and high fructose corn syrup. These are things that, quite frankly, you should try to avoid at all costs. So when we look at the label, you'll see now that food manufacturers are required to actually put trans fat. And in this case, this particular product does not have any grams of trans fat on it. However, there is a little bit of a loophole in that when we talked about looking at the ingredients and how important that is, actually there could be trans fat, even if it's not up to 0 grams, it could still contain some trans fat. So what you need to do is look at your ingredient list, see if you see anything in there that says partially hydrogenated or hydrogenated vegetable oil. If it says something like that in the ingredient list, that means it contains trans fat. It's just not 1 gram per serving. So keep that in mind. That's very, very important. The other thing to look for in your ingredient list is high fructose corn syrup. It will be listed on there as such, so just make sure that you don't buy stuff that contains high fructose corn syrup. And then the other thing to think about is when you're looking at your ingredients, just make sure that your list doesn't contain a lot of ingredients on there that sound very biochemical or organically chemical in nature. If you're reading an ingredient list and it's got words on there that you can't even pronounce, let alone know what they mean, I would encourage you to put that product back on the shelf. So again, these are just a couple more really important concepts to consider when it comes to your food label.